My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I want to talk about how to survive any situation or any environment. In the last few weeks, I have been talking about environment, but last week we took a little detour because it was Father's Day. But I want to get back into this environment. I think it's very important that people have this information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 basic rules, not just to survive any situation or environment, but to actually do well. And then I'm going to give you some examples. Some examples are they're going to be of people, obviously, and some examples I did have planned to use my dog. Now, Nelson was going to be my example, but he's hungry right now, and I was having a hard time getting him to stay still enough to do this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about him anyway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of him so you know who I'm talking about. So this is a picture of Nelson right here. I don't know if you see that. He's sleeping right there. And here's another picture of Nelson, self-soothing. He's got his jacket on and he's on the couch, of course, being comfortable. And he's holding one of his toys, which is actually a water bottle. I don't know if you could see that. There you go. Now, there's a couple of reasons for showing you those pictures, because he's amazingly relaxed in those pictures. So let's talk about surviving any situation or environment from Nelson's point of view. Nelson is a rescue. Nelson was abused severely. He was locked in a cage when he was just a puppy. He was malnourished. He was not fed very much, but somehow nature does what it does, and he was able to grow. And as he was growing, they never took him out of the cage, so he was growing into the cage, but he couldn't stand up. And so his legs were getting caught underneath him, and he was never able to stand up. So when we rescued him, for lack of a better term, if somebody else from the outside saw him, they would say he was really ugly. He looked like kind of like a gargoyle. He couldn't really walk. His legs were caught underneath him, and he was skin and bone. He had no trust in people. He had extreme separation anxiety. You would leave him for just a few minutes. You'd leave the house or leave another room, and you had no idea what you were coming back into. He would tear stuff up. He was scared to death. He would oscillate back and forth between being extremely passive, scared to death. And then on the other side of that, he would be extremely violent. So much so that his teeth would chatter because he was just really trying to he wanted to just to lash out. And he did this because he was scared. So it would go back and forth between, again, being violent and just being scared to death and just being docile, and just you would walk into a room or he would see another animal and he would just immediately roll on his back. So he was a mess in every which way because of his environment. But now he's like a perfect dog. Everything about him. He's loyal, he's fun, he's great, he's well adjusted, he can self-soothe, he does all these things. So why is Nelson a survivor? How was he able to adjust to his new environment and thrive? It was because he had the ability to put his past in the past. He had the ability to realize that what was, and what is. His new environment, he was loved, he was fed, he had affection, he had other animals to play with, he had safety, he had security. And he grew into that, and he changed. And so he was able to adapt to his new environment. Now, let's take human beings, for example. Something bad happens to them when they're 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, doesn't matter. And they seem to always live in that. Their self-esteem seems to be permanently destroyed. Now, let's look at it like this. We rescue dogs from the pound. If people were put in a pound and other people came by to rescue them, most of them would be euthanized because they're so untrustful of people. They're so unwilling to change. There's so much living in a victim mindset that they rarely do anything to make their lives better. And when love is given to them, they push it away. When there's trustworthy people around them, they tend to not trust them anyway. And they tend to go with what's familiar rather than what's actually good for them. But dogs are survivors. They don't do that. Maybe some dog does, I don't know. But most rescue dogs that I know are amazing. They can accept the love that's given to them. They can learn to trust people who are trustworthy. And so if you had two dogs in a pound and one of them said, "I hate human beings forever because what happened to me," that dog would be euthanized. The other dog saying, no, that's that environment. Let's see what happens in this new environment, and let's see what I can do in this new environment. Maybe this one will be great. That one will be saved. I think dogs are actually better therapists and much better at handling adverse environments than human beings. And too bad I couldn't get Nelson in here you could see him a little bit more. He's a perfect dog, he's great. If you want to read about information like that, and you want it to be entertaining, I would suggest Jack London. He's a great writer. He's an existentialist, as is myself. So Jack London wrote a lot of books. I'll give you two. One of them was called The Wild, and one of them was called White Fang. Now, they're both about dogs making positive transformations based on their new environment. But they both go in different directions. So in Call of the Wild, Buck is the domesticated dog that gets stolen, and he gets moved to Alaska to help be in a dog sled thing to look for gold. Harsh environment, there were wolves. So Buck, who's domesticated, but as part Saint Bernard in him, he's big, he becomes what he needs to be, which is what they say in the book. He calls upon his ancient primordial beast, and he becomes this powerful animal. Why? Because he needs to. And in White Fang, we're looking at a fighting dog who eventually becomes a domesticated animal. Why? Because it serves him better. So he learns to say, okay, I need to be violent if I'm getting into a fight, but if I'm going to live in a household with human beings, I need to be a different type of dog. So if you want to read something like that, I would suggest Jack London books. There's also movies if you want to see those. So I did want to start off with that. So let's get into, again, how to survive any situation or environment. I've got it broken down to 3 major laws to survive any situation. And they are rooted in empirical evidence, which is usually taken from prisoners of war. Now let's look at the first one. The first one would be, do not abandon the self, or don't abandon yourself. Basic. No victim would suffer from low self-esteem if they didn't abandon themselves. Many times victims default into blaming themselves, into finding fault with themselves when faced with a horrible person who does horrible things to them. Now, I know in psychology we talk about this ad nauseum, and we validate people to the ends of the earth about, oh, I understand, and yes, you should feel terrible, you were violated, and yes. But at some point, we need to empower people, because although the reality of their pain is there, and it's true, and they could feel hurt and degraded and devalued, that's true. But there's no logical reasoning of why that should be true. If somebody physically abuses you, verbally abuses you, sexually abuses you, they're a perpetrator. You're a victim. Why would you feel like you're a bad person who did something wrong? Who sold you that bad medicine? They're the bad person. You know, and the more we get into this about saying feelings are so important and we need to get into this, we need to talk about being a victim over and over, that's great, but we're not healing anybody by doing that. We need to understand right off. The other person is the bad person, period, end of story. We don't need to talk about it that much. Let me give you some examples of this. And I don't mean, of course, to make anybody feel bad or to trigger anybody, because I know some of this can be very difficult for people, as well as it could be myself. I'm a human being. So let's talk about when I was about 10 years old. And I was in a locker room at the Freeport Recreation Center that my mother took me to, that she was so proud to take me to because she was able to afford it for us to go there. And this supposed gym teacher guy who knew wrestling wanted to wrestle me. And obviously it didn't turn out to be that way. It was let's be honest, it's called a sexual assault of what he did to me. Do you want to know how much it affected my life? Absolutely zero. I didn't think I was a bad guy. I thought he was a very sick individual. That's the truth. When I got out of the locker room, I never told my mom because I wanted my mom to be happy about taking us there. My only negative about myself is that I was very young and I was small. And I was starting to work out and I thought, if I would have had more time to work out, I would have been stronger and I would have been able to beat him up. So let the good times roll, time to keep working out. But I never bought into this thing that I was a bad guy. You know, so I never abandoned myself. And how do you not abandon yourself? It's an interesting question. We should all ask that. How do you not abandon the self? It's by having a vision. And your vision should be of maybe success, being valuable, being powerful. So if you have that vision and something happens to you, you just want to learn how to overcome it. You don't sit there in a victim mentality the rest of your life. Somebody was telling me this not so long ago. I'm not going to give out any names. But she was telling me she invited a massage therapist. I guess you would call the masseur, a male therapist, massage therapist. And in the comfort of her own home. That makes sense. You know, so okay, I get that. No problem. You know, there's a lot of masseur professionals. And he started to massage her back. And he was kind of leaning over her. And at some point, what she said to me was, she goes, well, do men realize when they have an erection, or is it just like a natural thing that you can't even tell? I said, no, you're a man, you know. He goes, well, he was pushing it into my back, you know. I said, oh, that's terrible. She said, well, I said, what'd you do? She said, I stopped the massage, and I said, listen, that's absolutely inappropriate. You're going to leave right now, and I'm not going to pay you. Guess what? End of story. She didn't abandon herself. She didn't say, oh my God, what made this man do that to me? Maybe I was asking for it. She didn't say any of that. She said, you are a bad guy. You need to leave. No problem at all. Listen, again, not to make anybody triggered here, but I have talked to many women who have recovered very quickly, let's say, from being raped. And I said, well, how did you do that? And more than one woman gave me the answer. It was kind of like, well, listen, it was only about 20 seconds out of my life, and this guy was an absolute jerk that took advantage for just a short time. I had nothing to do with it. He's an evil human being that needs to be in jail. I didn't do anything wrong, so why should I wear that as something's wrong with me? It didn't decrease my dignity or self-esteem at all. It just was a frightening moment in time. So again, how to survive any situation. It's how you perceive it. Let's take a look at number 2 of the laws of how to survive any situation or environment. Inner defiance. Very big. This comes up a lot with prisoners of war. If you're in a terrible situation that can't be changed, then you probably should base your identity on your ability to endure it and to keep going. Do what needs to be done to survive until you can make your comeback. I've talked to women that felt like they had nowhere to run, and they would do what they need to do. They would go to school, and it might take them 5 years to be able to get that degree until they were able to get out of where they were. They didn't have 5 years of having low self-esteem and feeling pity and feeling like a victim. They understood their situation, and they made a calculated move of saying, I will accept this for what it is in the moment, so I can springboard later and to be able to do what I need to do. And even though it looked like they weren't in a good situation, they were inner defiant, which is what you need to do. And let's say if you're a prisoner of war, you get a bunch of guys aiming guns at you, you're not going to sit there and talk back all the time. You're obviously going to be a little bit more passive, but you're being passive with the thought that you're going to make a comeback. So that's your inner defiance. I've read a couple stories about this. One of them is that there was a prisoner of war. I think he wasn't a prisoner of war. He was rounded up, and I think he was put into Dachau, which is a death camp in World War II. And they forced him to do incredibly evil things, or really horrible things for a human being to have to do. So he had to help bury other Jewish people and things like this. And like, how would he be able to maintain inner defiance and to maintain who he was and not be, just have his whole self-esteem and psyche destroyed? Well, while he was doing this, he would dissociate. And what he would do is he would put his mind back to playing golf. And he loved playing golf. And he went back to his favorite golf course in his head. And he would say, okay, on hole number 1, number 2, number 3, these are the clubs I would use. And he would go over it in his mind. So his mind would be somewhere else. And in the end, he did survive, and he was released. He went back to that golf course, and he scored the same score as he always did, like within a range of that. How was he able to do that? Power of the mind. He didn't say, oh my God, I did all these evil things, and I saw all these evil things, and I can't trust anybody. No, he did what he had to do there. Inner defiance, survive what you need to survive, and then go out and do what you need to do. One of the greatest psychologists who ever lived was Viktor Frankl, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he also was he was a prisoner at Auschwitz during World War II. He lost his wife and he lost his whole family. And I'm going to read you this quote because I don't want to get it wrong, because he's so amazing. I don't want to ruin it. But this is what he said about how to survive any situation. He said, the one thing that you cannot take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. Say that again, all right? I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any circumstance. You do not have to choose victimhood. You could say that's a moment in time, and the person who victimized you, they're a horrible person. You're not the horrible person. Let's take a look at a few more examples, just in case I haven't given you enough already. Let's take a look at, well, let me say this first. Let's look at the third law in order to survive any situation or environment. Then I'll give you a great example of it. Number 3, always look to see how you can grow and how you can improve from every experience, and learn about what is versus what was. Now, the best example I can give of this is of Chris Weidman. And the reason why I want to talk to you about him today is, number 1, he's a great example. Number 2, he's from Baldwin, Long Island, just like me. Also, he is a wrestler, and Baldwin has a long history of great wrestlers. I was an okay wrestler. Chris Weidman was an amazing wrestler. But he is fighting in the UFC. and he broke his leg. And if you look it up on YouTube, do it on your own time. I'm not going to show it to you. It is probably the most disgusting, the most gruesome leg break I have ever seen. I mean, it's just horrific. You watch it, you're going to cry just by watching it. It's amazing that a human being could handle that much pain. And what he did was he went down and he closed his eyes. The referee came over and said, like, to the medics, you know, he passed out. And he opened his eyes and said, I'm not passing out. I'm just trying to relax. That's pretty amazing in itself. So let's go over the rules of what Chris Weidman did and compare it to our 3 survival rules. He said, number 1, what he did was try to calm down, relax. No need to keep kicking in that fight or flight response. The situation was already as dire as could be. Number 2, he said immediately, basically when he hit the ground, he said, how can I turn this situation into a positive? Powerful. And third, he said, I'm trying to look for the silver lining here. So here we see optimism, not delusion, but optimism. And he was already fighting his way back mentally after he got his leg broken. And here we look, he never abandoned the self. He didn't say, oh my God, my career's over and I'm a loser. He didn't say that. He did have inner defiance, that's for sure. And the third law of always look to see how you can grow from any experience, he did that immediately. As soon as he hit the ground, even though his leg was facing the other way, he immediately went into that coping skill. And like he said, it's a good coping skill. It's a great coping skill. So you can look him up on YouTube if you like, if you want to know more about him. Let me throw me in there because I know myself probably better than anybody. I had a lot of bad asthma attacks when I was a kid. It was a big part of my life. I spent a lot of my time in hospitals, oxygen tents. We had doctors coming to the house. They would do house calls. They would hit me with adrenaline shots. There were times when, I missed many days of school because of it. You might think that I was worried about it in any way. No, because even at that time, I was already trying to be a better version of myself. And I read somewhere that if you wanted to be a good bodybuilder, you had to have a big rib cage. And that would be good so you could put more muscle on yourself. And I thought, well, that's good. How do you do that? So I used to read and it said, breathe deep as much as you can and do squats. So I thought, well, listen, when I have an asthma attack, I can go for like 4 or 5, maybe sometimes 7 days in a row of expanding my rib cage. So in between that, I would do some squats while I was having an asthma attack in order to increase my rib cage. And I thought, well, what a gift. I love these asthma attacks. It's making my rib cage bigger. The medication for asthma is usually, at least back then, it was stuff like, now they use like albuterol and things like this, but back then they used to use Primatene Mist, which is basically methamphetamine. So it would speed up your metabolism and you wouldn't want to eat. Plus you wouldn't want to eat because it's hard to breathe when your stomach's full. So you would get lean. And I remember taking off my shirt going, oh, look at my abs. I got abs for miles. You know, I had the intercostals and the serratus muscles and I'm like, wow, this is great. My rib cage is getting bigger and my abs are getting really jacked. So I liked my asthma attacks. I looked forward to them. I knew they were gonna come, so I might as well look forward to them. The other thing is that I learned how to cope with discomfort and heavy breathing. You know, and the thought there was too, when I was in running races, people would be like, oh my God, I'm breathing so hard. I'm like, are you kidding? You can't breathe hard for 30 seconds? Sometimes I have to breathe hard for a week. So running to me was not a big deal. That's why I became a good runner, even though all the doctors told me I couldn't be a good runner if I had asthma. They were wrong. They were wrong. Also, asthma attacks are brought on by anxiety, a lot of stress. So even at a very young age, I started to learn that there were things that were worth caring about and things that were, who cares? You know, you can leave it for tomorrow. And you start to learn how to be very stoic. I didn't know a thing about stoic philosophy when I was a little kid, but I did know that if I got too nervous or too scared or too tied up in things that I couldn't control, that it would immediately put me into an asthma attack and I could end up going to the hospital. So I learned how to breathe. I learned how to pay attention to the things that I could take care of. And I learned how to, if I couldn't take care of it myself and it was not in my control, I learned how to basically have what you would call a healthy detachment from that. Healthy detachment is from Buddhism. I didn't know from Buddhism when I was a kid. I just knew I needed to stay healthy. And let me give you one more, because I love Bruce Lee so much. And he talked about a lot of things. Not only was he the greatest fighter who ever lived, but he was also a philosophy major at the University of Washington. And I'm going to read this word for word again, because I don't want to get it wrong. I cannot improve on his words, that's for sure. So I'm just going to read this. It's real quick. Bruce Lee, he says, empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it into a teapot, and it becomes the teapot. Water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. So what Bruce Lee is saying here is very much rooted in the Tao philosophy. He didn't just make that up out of nowhere. It was his version of it. And it also goes along with the 3 rules that I've told you. So what he's talking about here, about being formless and shapeless and being able to change into the shape of your environment in order to do well. It's basically these rules. Number 1, go with the flow. Number 2, do not get trapped in a fixed, obsolete mindset. Always adapt to your new environment. Number 3, learn the difference between what is, what was, or what you want it to be. Again, be formless and shapeless. Flow into the next situation in your life. If something bad happens, don't sit there and go, oh, I wish it was better, I wish it was different, I wish it was like that. It's not. Start preparing for the new part of your life. Number 4, extinguish the ego. I've heard before somebody say that ego really stands for edging greatness out. And that's true. If you're too locked into this, what you would call an identity or an ego, Buddhists would say that it's fake. Like if you're walking around with, cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, and that's your look, and you only listen to, country music. You think that's who you are? That's not who you are. Those are some of the things that you took on in your life that you might identify with, but that's not who you are. Somebody takes away your cowboy hat and your cowboy boots, then what do you become? You become sad? No, listen, you can turn around and be a hippie anytime you want. You need to be able to adapt to your new environment, if there's a new environment. I mean, if it's possible for you to stay in the same environment all your life and you love that environment, well then good for you. But most people can't do that. And what else would Bruce Lee say? He would say, have a healthy detachment from all impermanent things and be aware that everything is impermanent. Which all of this really comes down to our 3rd law that we talked about. Seek to grow from every experience and situation. So I think this video got to be a little bit too long, but that's okay. So let's go with this real quick. 3 major laws to survive any situation. Number 1, don't abandon the self. How do you not abandon the self? By having your own vision of who and what you want to be and what you want to get out of life. Number 2, inner defiance. Even if you have to go against your principles for a little bit, you're playing the long game. Inner defiance. And number 3, always seek to see how you can grow and improve from every situation. And don't take too much time worrying about what you would like it to be or what it was. Worry about what is and start making decisions from that. So I hope you found today's show to be valuable. I'm Joe Peroni from the Rise Above Project. Please subscribe, and you know what, you can leave a comment too. Not too many people leave comments, I don't know why. But anyway, tell a couple of friends, that would be nice. Thank you very much. See you next week.